No one wanted the fat virgin bride until the billionaire CEO declared, "She's mine now." A woman stands alone at her own wedding, and the groom just said he doesn't want her. The guests are laughing. She's humiliated, broken, and ready to disappear forever. But then, the room goes silent, because a billionaire CEO, a stranger in the crowd, stands up and says 6 shocking words. "She's mine now." The world erupts. Was it pity or something deeper? He takes her hand, promising protection. But behind that promise hides secrets, grief, and a battle between image and faith. Soon the media turns cruel, the world watches, and both hearts are tested by fire. She was once unwanted, he was once untouchable. But when the truth comes out, will love be enough to save them both? Or will the price of compassion destroy them forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of First Community Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Lucia May Daniels stood in the small vestibule, her fingers tracing the delicate lace her mother had spent months sewing into her wedding dress. The fabric was soft against her skin, each stitch a testament to her mother's love. She could hear the murmurs from the sanctuary, whispers that weren't meant to be kind. "Can you believe that dress size?" One voice carried through the thin walls. "Poor Calvin." Another replied with a snicker. Lucia closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath that made the bodice of her dress pull tight. For 10 years, she'd been the one creating wedding cakes in this very church's kitchen. Her hands had carefully crafted sugar flowers and delicate frosting for countless happy couples. But today, there would be no cake with her name on it. Her stomach churned at the thought, but she pushed the anxiety down, replacing it with the Bible verse she'd memorized as a girl. "Love is patient. Love is kind." "It's time, sweetheart," Pastor Reuben Clark said softly, appearing at her side. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he offered his arm. She'd known him since she was a child, had sat in his Sunday school classes learning about grace and forgiveness. Now he would lead her down the aisle to begin her new life. The organ music swelled, and Lucia's heart beat in time with the familiar wedding march. She gripped her bouquet of white roses tighter. The thorns had been carefully removed, but she could still feel their phantom pricks against her palms. The wooden doors opened, and she stepped into the sanctuary. The faces turned toward her, some smiling, others barely concealing their judgment. She kept her eyes forward, toward the altar where Calvin waited. His back was rigid, his shoulders tense under his rented tuxedo. Her mother sat in the front pew, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Pride and worry warred on her face as Lucia passed by. Each step felt heavier than the last, but Lucia kept moving, kept believing. This was her moment, her answer to years of prayers. The closer she got to the altar, the more she could see Calvin's face. Something was wrong. His usual warm brown eyes were cold, distant. His jaw was set in a hard line she'd never seen before. Still, she took her place beside him, her heart thundering so loud she could barely hear Pastor Reuben begin the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice steady and warm. "We are gathered here today." That's when it happened. Calvin took a step back, his face twisting into an expression that made Lucia's blood run cold. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as he opened his mouth. "I can't do this," he said, his voice carrying through the hushed sanctuary. Then louder, cruel, "No man wants a woman built like that." The words hit Lucia like physical blows. Gasps erupted through the church, followed by scattered laughter that felt like daggers in her heart. She heard her mother cry out, followed by the dull thud of someone fainting. Lucia stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The roses suddenly looked garish, mocking. Children's voices rose in confused whispers, their innocent questions somehow worse than the adults' knowing looks. "Mummy, what's happening? Why is the bride crying?" Tears blurred her vision as the reality of what was happening crashed over her. The lace her mother had so lovingly sewn felt like it was suffocating her. The sanctuary, her sanctuary for so many years, had become a torture chamber of pointing fingers and pitying looks. She turned and ran. The heavy skirts of her dress tangled around her legs, but she kept going. The lace train dragged behind her like broken wings, catching on the rough wooden pews as she fled. Her feet, pinched in shoes bought specially for this day, carried her down the aisle she'd just walked with such hope. Just before she reached the doors, through her tears, she caught sight of someone in the back pew, a man she'd never seen before. While others' faces showed mockery or pity, his eyes held something different, something that looked remarkably like understanding. But she couldn't stop to process it. The weight of hundreds of eyes on her back drove her forward, out into the morning sunshine that now felt harsh and exposing. Behind her, the sounds of chaos erupted in the church. Pastor Reuben's voice rose above the din, calling for order. But Lucia was already gone, running down the church steps, her white dress a beacon of her shame in the morning light. The lace her mother had sewn with such love now trailed in the dust, marking her path of escape like a trail of broken dreams. Adam Holt shifted uncomfortably in the hard wooden pew at the back of the church. The morning sun filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across his expensive charcoal suit. He checked his watch again. 10:35. The mayor was supposed to meet him after the service to discuss the waterfront property deal, but this wedding ceremony was dragging on longer than expected. He hadn't stepped foot in a church since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. The familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals brought back memories he'd rather keep buried. His late wife had loved church, had dragged him to services every Sunday with her gentle persistence. But after losing her to cancer, he'd lost his faith too. The wedding march began to play, and Adam resisted the urge to check his phone for emails. He was a busy man. Running a billion-dollar company didn't leave much time for sentiment. Still, something made him look up as the bride appeared in the doorway. She wasn't what society would call a typical bride. She was plus-sized, but there was something captivating about her face. A gentle kindness that seemed to radiate from within. Her dress was simple but elegant, with handmade lace that spoke of love in every stitch. Adam noticed how she held her head high despite the whispers that rippled through the congregation. He watched as she made her way down the aisle, saw how she focused on her groom with such hope in her eyes. It reminded him of Sarah on their wedding day, that same pure trust and joy. The memory made his chest ache. Then everything went wrong. The groom's cruel words sliced through the air like a knife. No man wants a woman built like that. Adam's hands gripped the edge of the pew. The collective gasp of the congregation was followed by something worse, laughter. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to turn this sacred moment into a public humiliation. The bride, he didn't even know her name, ran past him, her lace train trailing behind her like broken dreams. In that split second, as she passed his pew, he saw her face clearly for the first time. The raw pain in her eyes triggered another memory. Sarah, standing in a playground, confronting a group of children who were taunting an overweight girl. "She's beautiful," his wife had declared fiercely. And anyone who can't see that needs to check their own heart. The memory ignited something in Adam's chest, a burning anger he hadn't felt in years. Before he could think it through, he was on his feet. The crowd was still murmuring, some laughing, others trying to help the mother who had fainted in the front pew. Adam strode down the aisle, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. People turned to stare at him. The stranger in the expensive suit walking with such purpose. He could feel their eyes, hear their whispers, but he didn't care. 3 years of carefully maintained corporate control fell away as he reached the altar. The groom, a pathetic excuse for a man, was still standing there, looking smug. Adam faced the congregation, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "If no one wants her, I do. She's mine now." The silence that followed was absolute. Then came the flutter of camera phones, flashes popping like lightning in the stunned sanctuary. Adam ignored them all, turning on his heel and heading for the door. He could hear Pastor Reuben calling out, trying to restore order, but it was too late. The damage and the declaration had been made. Outside, he found her sitting on the church steps, her white dress pooled around her like fallen snow. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall from clouds that had gathered during the ceremony. Without hesitation, Adam shrugged off his tailored jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. She looked up at him, her makeup streaked with tears, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. Was this another cruel joke? Another public humiliation? He could see the questions in her gaze. "You deserve better than their laughter," he said softly, offering his hand. For a moment she just stared at his outstretched hand. Then slowly she placed her fingers in his. They were cold, but there was strength in her grip as he helped her to her feet. His jacket looked oddly right on her shoulders, despite being many sizes too big. The rain was falling steadily now, dotting the white fabric of her dress with darker spots. Adam led her to his waiting car, where his driver held the door open with professional discretion. As he helped her inside, he could hear sirens in the distance, no doubt the first wave of paparazzi already on their way. His impulsive action would be tomorrow's headlines, but looking at her now, huddled in his jacket, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The leather seats creaked as he slid in beside her. She sat perfectly still, as if afraid to take up too much space, his jacket clutched around her like armor. The rain drummed on the roof of the car, creating a cocoon of white noise that seemed to separate them from the chaos they'd left behind. Through the tinted windows, Adam could see people spilling out of the church now, phones raised, trying to capture this moment. The sirens were getting closer. He nodded to his driver, who smoothly pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the church, the cruel laughter, and the life she'd thought she was going to have. Neither of them spoke as the car merged into traffic. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and her occasional shaky breath. Adam noticed she was still holding her bouquet, the white roses now slightly crushed from her tight grip. Water dripped from the flowers onto the leather seat, but he didn't care. The sirens were louder now, at least 3 different vehicles by the sound of it. In the rearview mirror, he could see the familiar cars of local news stations weaving through traffic, trying to catch up. His impulsive declaration would feed the media circus for weeks, maybe months. The billionaire CEO who claimed a jilted bride in front of her entire congregation, it was the kind of story that would sell millions of papers. But looking at the woman beside him, seeing how she struggled to maintain her dignity even now, Adam knew he'd do it again. Sometimes standing up to cruelty was worth any price. Sarah had taught him that, long ago, on a playground where she'd defended a stranger. Now, in her memory, he'd done the same. The rain continued to fall as they drove through the streets of the small town, leaving behind the laughter, the judgment, and the life they'd both known just hours before. Neither of them knew what would come next, but for now, the silence between them was filled with something that felt almost like peace. The storm intensified as Adam's car wound its way up the mountain road, windshield wipers fighting against the deluge. Lucia sat quietly, still wrapped in his oversized jacket, her wedding dress a sodden reminder of the day's humiliation. Lightning illuminated the dense forest on either side of the road, revealing glimpses of an iron gate that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The car rolled to a stop as the gate slowly opened, revealing a winding driveway that led to what could only be described as a modern castle. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowed warmly against the dark stone exterior, offering a beacon of light in the stormy night. "Welcome to my home," Adam said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the church. Lucia's eyes widened as they pulled up to the grand entrance. A covered portico sheltered them from the rain as Adam's driver opened their door. She stepped out carefully, her ruined wedding dress heavy with water and mud. Inside, the foyer's marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Adam led her to a spacious living room where a fire already crackled in a massive stone fireplace. Lucia sank into a leather armchair, feeling small and out of place among such luxury. Water dripped from her dress onto the expensive rug, but she couldn't summon the energy to care. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would someone like you defend someone like me?" Adam stood by the fireplace, his profile sharp against the dancing flames. "Because what they did was wrong. No one deserves to be humiliated like that." "But you don't even know me." "I know enough." He turned to face her fully. "I know that cruel people took what should have been your most precious day and turned it into a spectacle. I couldn't stand by and watch." Lucia wrapped his jacket tighter around herself, though the fire's warmth had begun to seep into her bones. "What happens now?" "Now we make a practical arrangement." Adam's voice took on a businesslike tone. "The media will be relentless. They'll camp outside your house, harass your family, dig through your past. But here, you'll be protected. I have security, privacy, and enough space that you can heal without their constant intrusion. You want me to stay here?" Lucia's voice cracked with disbelief. "In one of the guest rooms," he clarified quickly. "Until the attention dies down. Consider it a business arrangement if you like. I provide sanctuary. You get peace." Lucia closed her eyes, too exhausted to argue. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, collapsed in a pew as her daughter fled the church. What choice did she really have? Going home meant facing not just the media, but every pitying glance, every whispered comment, every reminder of Calvin's cruel words. "I'll stay," she whispered, then added, "But I need to pray about this." Adam's expression flickered with something like recognition. Or was it pain? Before he nodded. "I'll have Mrs. Reynolds show you to your room. She's my housekeeper." As if summoned, a motherly woman in her 60s appeared with towels and a warm smile. "Come along, dear. Let's get you out of those wet things." The guest room was larger than Lucia's entire apartment. Mrs. Reynolds helped her out of the ruined wedding dress, tusking sympathetically at the sodden lace. "Such beautiful work," she murmured, hanging it carefully in the bathroom to dry. Alone at last, wearing borrowed pajamas that Mrs. Reynolds had found, Lucia knelt beside the bed. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand your plan, but I trust you. Please guide me through this storm." Morning brought no clarity, only chaos. Lucia woke to find her phone flooded with notifications. The headlines made her stomach churn. "Fat virgin bride stolen by billionaire." "CEO's pity proposal sparks scandal." "Love at first flight. Jilted bride catches billionaire's eye." Each word felt like another stone added to the weight of her humiliation. She could barely breathe as she scrolled through the cruel comments, the mocking memes, the endless speculation about her worth and Adam's motives. A gentle knock interrupted her spiral of despair. "Lucia?" Adam's voice came through the door. "There are reporters at the gate, but they can't get past security. You're safe here." She opened the door to find him looking as impeccable as ever in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks. The contrast between them, her in borrowed pajamas, him in what probably cost more than her monthly rent, couldn't have been starker. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." "Mrs. Reynolds has breakfast ready," he said. "Would you join me?" The kitchen was a chef's dream, all gleaming stainless steel and warm wood. But Mrs. Reynolds had set their places at a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the mountains. Steam rose from plates piled with fluffy pancakes, the scent of coffee filling the air. Lucia sat down, acutely aware of the chair's stability beneath her larger frame. But Adam seemed oblivious to her discomfort, passing the syrup with casual grace. "I saw the headlines," she said quietly, staring at her plate. "They'll find something new to obsess about soon enough." Adam's voice was gentle but firm. "The media is like a child with a new toy, passionate at first, then quickly distracted." Lucia picked up her fork, then set it down again. Out of habit, she bowed her head to pray. The words came naturally. "Dear Lord, thank you for this food, for this shelter, and for the kindness of strangers. Please bless this meal and those who prepared it. Amen." When she looked up, Adam was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I haven't prayed in years," he admitted softly. "Not since Sarah, not since my wife died." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Without thinking, Lucia reached across the table and took his hand. "Then I'll pray for both of us." His fingers tightened around hers for just a moment before letting go. They ate in companionable silence after that, the mountain mist swirling beyond the windows, the sound of reporters' shouts too distant to penetrate their temporary peace. Mrs. Reynolds refilled their coffee cups, her presence both efficient and maternal. Outside, rain still fell, but softer now, more like tears than rage. Lucia cut another bite of pancake, surprised to find her appetite returning despite everything. This wasn't how she'd imagined spending the morning after her wedding. But as she watched Adam reading the newspaper, his forehead creased in concentration, she felt something settle in her soul. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Sometimes God's plans looked nothing like our own, but His grace could be found even in the midst of storms. The truce they'd formed over breakfast was fragile, built on shared trauma and borrowed strength. But it was a beginning, and for now, that would have to be enough. The mountain estate settled into an uneasy rhythm over the next few days. Mrs. Reynolds showed Lucia to a state-of-the-art kitchen that made her small bakery seem like a child's playset. The stainless steel appliances gleamed under soft lighting, and the marble countertops stretched endlessly. "Mr. Holt mentioned you're a baker," Mrs. Reynolds said warmly. "Perhaps you'd like to make something for the staff. They do love their sweets." Lucia's hands itched to work with dough again. Baking had always been her refuge, her way of speaking love into existence. "I'd like that very much." Soon the kitchen filled with the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon. Lucia lost herself in the familiar motions of measuring, mixing, and kneading. She made her signature cinnamon rolls, the recipe passed down from her grandmother. The staff drifted in, drawn by the smell, their faces lighting up at the sight of fresh-baked treats. Adam found her there later, flour dusting her borrowed apron. "You've won over my entire security team," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Thompson actually smiled. I didn't know his face could do that. Lucia blushed, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's the least I can do after everything." "Would you like to see the greenhouse?" Adam offered suddenly. "It needs some attention. Sarah used to—" He trailed off, pain flickering across his face. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and light, but neglect had crept in around the edges. Dead leaves littered the floor, and many plants drooped sadly in their pots. Lucia moved through the space slowly, touching wilted leaves with gentle fingers. "I can help here," she said softly. "Plants just need patience and love." Over the next few days, Lucia split her time between the kitchen and the greenhouse. She pruned dead leaves, repotted struggling plants, and whispered encouragement to new growth. The space began to transform, much like the house itself seemed to warm under her presence. One afternoon, while dusting the formal living room, she found a photograph on the piano. A stunning woman with auburn hair smiled at the camera, her eyes sparkling with life. Sarah. Lucia's heart ached as she studied the image. The woman's joy was infectious, even from within the frame. She loved that piano. Adam's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his expression distant. She would play for hours, filling the house with music. Now it's just quiet. Lucia set the photo down carefully. "Tell me about her?" They sat on the piano bench, and Adam spoke haltingly at first, then with increasing warmth about Sarah's passion for music, her fierce defense of underdogs, her laugh that could light up a room. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always saw the best in people." "Loss shapes us," Lucia replied quietly. "But it doesn't have to define us." Adam's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. His expression hardened as he checked the screen. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into his office, but his voice carried through the thick door. "I don't care about the stock price. No, I won't issue a statement. This is not up for discussion." Lucia crept closer, unable to help herself. "She's destroying your reputation." A voice crackled through the speaker. "The board is concerned. Your investors are nervous. You need to end this circus now." That night, Lucia pulled her few belongings together, folding the borrowed clothes with trembling hands. She couldn't be responsible for ruining this man's life, not after his kindness. Adam found her as she was zipping her bag. "What are you doing?" "You don't owe me your ruin," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard your call earlier. Your advisors are right. I'm toxic to your reputation." "Stop." Adam's voice was firm. "My reputation can handle a few weeks of gossip. You deserve a chance to heal before you decide who you are without their cruelty." Lucia's hand stilled on her bag. "I can't repay you for this. I'm not asking for repayment. Stay, one more week at least, please." She looked out the window, where snow had begun to fall in gentle flakes. The white crystals danced in the gathering darkness, pure and clean against the night sky. Could grace really exist here, in this mansion built on guilt and grief? Could healing happen in a place where both their hearts carried such heavy wounds? The snow continued to fall, covering the world in silence, as Lucia wondered about the mysterious ways God worked through broken people to create something new. The black tie charity dinner loomed before them like a fortress of crystal and judgment. Lucia stood in the mansion's entryway, her borrowed evening gown a deep navy that flowed like water. Her hands fidgeted with the delicate beading at her waist. "You look beautiful," Adam said quietly, adjusting his bow tie. "Remember, you have nothing to prove to these people." Lucia managed a shaky smile. "I've never been to anything this fancy before. What if I use the wrong fork?" "Then I'll use the wrong one too." His gentle humor eased some of her tension. The ride to the venue was silent, both lost in their thoughts. When their limousine pulled up to the red carpet, camera flashes exploded like lightning. Lucia's breath caught in her throat. "Take my arm," Adam said softly. "We'll face them together." They emerged into the chaos. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a dizzying cacophony. Lucia focused on putting one foot in front of the other, clinging to Adam's steady presence beside her. "Mr. Holt, Is this your new girlfriend? Lucia, how did you seduce a billionaire? What happened to the other groom? The questions felt like arrows, each one finding its mark. But Adam's hand remained firm at her back, guiding her through the gauntlet of cameras and microphones. Just before they reached the doors, a reporter in a sharp red dress stepped directly into their path. Her smile was razor-sharp. Miss Daniels, there are rumors you're being paid as a companion. Care to comment on your arrangement with Mr. Holt? The words hit Lucia like a physical blow. Her face burned hot enough to melt steel, shame crawling up her neck. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Adam's jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grinding. His body tensed like a coiled spring, ready to unleash fury on the reporter. But before he could speak, his advisor, Marcus, appeared at his elbow. "Let it go," Marcus muttered, tugging at Adam's sleeve. "The press is baiting you. Don't give them ammunition." For a moment, Lucia thought Adam would ignore the advice. His eyes blazed with barely contained rage. But then he took a deep breath and simply guided her past the reporter, his silence more dignified than any retort could have been. Inside, the ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and flowing champagne. Lucia felt every eye on her as they made their way to their table. The whispers followed like persistent shadows. Did you see her size? What could he possibly see in her? It must be publicity. Adam was scheduled to give a speech about his company's charitable foundation. As the time approached, Marcus pulled him aside for last-minute coaching. Lucia watched from their table, feeling more alone than ever despite the crowded room. When Adam took the stage, the crowd fell respectfully quiet. He adjusted the microphone, his expression unreadable. Then he looked directly at Lucia. "Tonight, we're here to talk about worth," he began, "about how we measure value in our society. My foundation exists because I believe every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to be seen for who they truly are." He paused, his knuckles white on the podium. "Recently, I've been reminded that we still have far to go, that we still judge books by their covers and hearts by their packaging. But I'm here to tell you that beauty isn't measured by size, it's measured by courage." The silence in the room was absolute. Lucia felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I've seen that courage firsthand." Adam continued, "I've seen it in someone who faces cruelty with grace, who answers judgment with kindness, who shows strength not through power, but through gentleness." The crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. But Lucia noticed Marcus's face had gone pale, and he was already on his phone, typing frantically. Later that night, after they'd returned to the mansion, Lucia couldn't sleep. She wandered to the kitchen for some tea, but stopped short when she heard voices from Adam's study. "The board has made their decision." Marcus's voice was tense. "They're giving you an ultimatum. Either she goes, or you resign as CEO." "They can't do this." Adam's voice was hoarse. "They can, and they are. Your speech tonight was the last straw. The conservative members are worried about the company's image. The progressive ones think you're exploiting her for publicity. You're losing support on all sides." I was defending her. And now you have to choose. Everything you've built, everything Sarah helped you build, or her. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Lucia pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. She'd heard enough. Back in her room, she pulled out paper and pen with trembling hands. The words came slowly, tears spotting the page. "Dear Adam, thank you for showing me what true kindness looks like, for defending me when no one else would. But I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. Some bridges cost too much to cross. With gratitude, Lucia." She packed quietly in the dark, leaving behind the borrowed clothes and taking only what she'd come with. In the kitchen, she baked one last time, a small loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. On a napkin, she wrote a final message. If love is true, it will find its way. As dawn painted the sky in shades of rose gold, Lucia slipped out of the mansion that had briefly felt like shelter from the storm. She didn't look back, knowing if she did, her courage might fail. The morning light caught her tears, turning them to diamonds that fell unnoticed in her wake. In his room, Adam slept fitfully, unaware that his house was already growing colder, emptier, more hollow with each step that carried Lucia away from him. The small cabin sat, nestled among towering pines, its weathered wood walls holding firm against the autumn wind. Lucia stood on the tiny porch, key trembling in her hand. This would be home now, a far cry from both her mother's cozy house and Adam's mansion. But it was hers. She'd found it through a local realtor who didn't recognize her from the news. The elderly owner had been eager to rent to someone who'd bring life back to the place. At $800 a month, it would stretch her savings thin, but Lucia knew in her heart it was right. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of morning light. The main room held a wood stove, a threadbare couch, and a kitchen with just enough counter space for baking. A narrow bedroom and bathroom completed the simple floor plan. Lucia ran her hand along the rough-hewn walls, whispering a prayer of thanksgiving. The first week was spent scrubbing, organizing, and turning the cabin into a home. She hung crisp curtains her mother had sewn years ago, arranged her few belongings, and set up her laptop on a small desk by the window. Each night, she wrote in her journal, processing the whirlwind her life had become. The idea for the bakery came during one of these quiet evening sessions. The cabin sat just off the main logging road, where trucks rumbled past starting at dawn. Those workers needed breakfast, and Lucia needed purpose. She took her remaining savings and rented a tiny storefront that had once been a tackle shop. Bread and Grace opened on a crisp October morning. Lucia had stayed up all night baking, filling the shop with the scent of fresh sourdough, honey wheat, and her signature cinnamon swirl bread. She'd painted the window sign herself, simple white letters with a wheat stalk design. The first customer was a logger named Pete, his fluorescent safety vest dusty from work. He eyed the display case uncertainly. "Smells good enough to wake the dead," he said gruffly. "How much for a loaf?" Lucia smiled warmly. $4 for the basic loaves, $5 for specialty. Coffee's on the house today. He left with 2 loaves and a promise to tell his crew. By noon, she had a steady stream of customers. Not just loggers, but local mothers with young children, elderly couples, and people drawn in by the aroma wafting onto the street. A widow named Rose became a regular, coming in each morning for a small roll and conversation. "You've got healing hands, dear," she told Lucia one day. "This bread tastes like my grandmother's used to, full of love." The words brought tears to Lucia's eyes. She'd always believed baking was a form of ministry, a way to share God's love through something as simple as daily bread. Each loaf was prayed over as it went into the oven, each customer treated as a soul in need of kindness. At night, after cleaning the shop and restocking supplies, Lucia would sit at her laptop and write. The devotionals flowed from her heart, honest reflections about pain, healing, and finding God's grace in unexpected places. She published them under L.M. Daniels, wanting her words to stand on their own merit. October turned to November, bringing early snow and quieter days. One particularly cold morning, as Lucia arranged still warm loaves on the shelves, a well-dressed man entered the shop. He wore an expensive overcoat and carried himself with careful authority. "I'll take everything," he said simply, pulling out a credit card. Lucia blinked in surprise. "Everything?" "Every loaf you have. It's for a food bank." She wrapped each loaf carefully, adding an extra cinnamon swirl bread at no charge. The man, whom she didn't recognize as Thomas, Adam's longtime driver, loaded the boxes into a sleek black car and drove away. What Lucia didn't know was that the bread would end up at various homeless shelters across the city, delivered anonymously, but arranged by the man whose absence felt like a constant ache in her heart. The weeks passed slowly but peacefully. Lucia found rhythm in her new life, baking before dawn, serving customers through the day, writing by lamplight at night. Her online following grew steadily, readers drawn to her gentle wisdom and transparent struggle with self-worth. She wrote about finding beauty in brokenness, about how God uses our deepest wounds to help others heal. Never mentioning names or specific events, she shared her journey from shame to grace, from rejection to acceptance of God's unconditional love. One evening, as November's early darkness settled over the cabin, Lucia was sweeping the bakery floor and listening to the local news on her small radio. The familiar voice of the anchor suddenly caught her attention. And in an inspiring local story, an anonymous writer known only as L.M. Daniels has been touching thousands of lives with daily messages of faith and hope. The author's posts about finding divine purpose in pain have gone viral, reaching readers across the country. Many claim these devotionals have helped them through depression, loss, and self-doubt. Lucia leaned on her broom, tears falling freely now. The same world that had once laughed at her in church now found comfort in her words. God had taken her deepest hurt and turned it into healing for others. She thought of the scripture she'd read that morning. Beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. Standing in her humble bakery, surrounded by the lingering scent of fresh bread and winter's first snow falling softly outside, Lucia felt a peace that surpassed understanding. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Saw the news story, sweetheart. So proud of you. Your words are helping people find their way home to God's love. Lucia smiled through her tears, remembering another note she'd left behind in a different life. If love is true, it will find its way. Perhaps, she thought, love had led her exactly where she needed to be, not to a mansion on a hill, but to a place where broken hearts could find bread for their hunger and grace for their souls. The small bell above the shop door tinkled as the last customer of the day entered, seeking warmth and sustenance. Lucia wiped her eyes, straightened her apron, and went to serve them with the same gentle kindness she offered everyone who crossed her threshold. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in clean white wonder, while inside Bread and Grace, hope rose like warm yeast, transforming simple flour and water into something holy. The late autumn sun cast long shadows across Adam Holt's corner office on the 68th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city below, now dusted with the season's first snow. He sat at his mahogany desk, absently scrolling through emails on his tablet while his morning coffee grew cold. Mr. Holt. His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. I've forwarded you that devotional series I mentioned, the one that's been helping me through my divorce. The author writes under L.M. Daniels. Thank you, Margaret, he replied, more out of politeness than interest. Adam opened the email, expecting the usual religious platitudes he'd grown weary of since losing his wife. The first post caught his eye. Faith doesn't end when the crowd leaves. It begins when you stand alone. His breath caught. He knew that phrasing, had heard similar words over breakfast weeks ago. The gentle wisdom, the careful way each sentence balanced hope with honesty. It was unmistakably Lucia's voice. He scrolled through more entries, recognition flooding him. The way she described grace as falling like morning dew on parched hearts. He'd heard her use that metaphor when blessing their meals. Her distinctive handwriting appeared in the header image, the same flowing script he'd seen on the prayer note she'd left him. Guilt and admiration wrestled in his chest. While he'd been drowning in board meetings and damage control, she'd been transforming her pain into purpose. The devotionals spoke of finding worth beyond appearances, of seeing God's hand in rejection's aftermath. Not once did she mention the wedding disaster or his role in her story. "Mr. Holt," Margaret's voice interrupted again. "The board is waiting in the conference room." He straightened his tie and walked down the hallway, his mind still on Lucia's words. The board members sat around the long table, faces stern as they discussed quarterly projections and market strategies. Adam found himself staring out the window, watching snowflakes swirl against the glass. "Mr. Holt, your thoughts on the merger proposal?" "I'm sorry," he said, turning back to the room. "Could you repeat the question?" The CFO frowned, sliding another document across the table. But Adam could barely focus on the numbers. The same board members who'd demanded Lucia's removal now droned on about profit margins and shareholder confidence. He wondered how many of them had ever known true loss, or found the courage to begin again. After the meeting, Adam cancelled his remaining appointments. He drove through the gathering dusk, away from the gleaming towers of downtown toward the quieter outskirts, where he knew Bread and Grace stood. Snow was falling harder now, transforming the world into something softer, more forgiving. He parked his car several blocks away, not wanting to be recognized. Through the bakery's frosted windows, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Inside, Lucia stood behind the counter, wearing a flour-dusted apron and a genuine smile. She was laughing with an elderly customer, her face radiant with joy as she carefully wrapped a loaf of bread. Adam watched as she served person after person, each interaction infused with the same gentle kindness. No trace remained of the wounded bride who'd fled the church. In her place stood a woman who'd found her calling, who'd turned rejection into ministry. The shop's last customer left, and Lucia began her closing routine. Adam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the note he'd written earlier. Simple words on heavy stationery. "You are seen. You are chosen." He waited until she turned away to wipe down the display cases, then quietly slipped the folded paper under the door. Back in his car, he watched as she discovered it while sweeping. She read it once, twice, 3 times, her face softening with each reading. Through the window, he saw her lips move in what he knew was prayer. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, though he couldn't hear the words. Something in his chest ached at the sight. The woman he'd tried to protect had found her own strength, had built something beautiful from the ashes of that day. Her light shone brighter now than it ever had in his mansion's gilded halls. Lucia tucked the note into her apron pocket, unaware of its author but visibly touched by its message. She continued closing the shop, humming a hymn he recognized from their shared breakfasts, her movements peaceful and unhurried. Adam sat in his car until she turned out the lights and locked up. He watched her walk to a small car, noting how she paused to help an elderly man navigate the snowy sidewalk before driving away. Only then did he start his engine, the words of her devotional echoing in his mind. "Faith doesn't end when the crowd leaves. It begins when you stand alone." He drove home through the swirling snow, past his gleaming office tower and beyond the mansion on the hill, carrying the image of her radiant joy like a flame against the gathering dark. The morning sun cast long shadows through the bakery windows as Lucia kneaded dough for her daily bread. Her hands worked rhythmically, finding peace in the familiar motion, when her phone began buzzing incessantly. She wiped flour from her hands and checked the screen, finding dozens of notifications flooding in. A popular food and lifestyle blogger had shared her story overnight. The post showed pictures of Bread and Grace, describing not just the quality of Lucia's, baking, but the way she treated every customer like family. The blogger wrote about witnessing Lucia give free bread to a struggling mother, about the scripture verses she tucked into each package, about the way her smile could warm the coldest morning. This isn't just a bakery, the post concluded. It's a ministry of love wrapped in the scent of fresh bread. Within hours, the post went viral. By mid-morning, a line stretched down the sidewalk. Lucia's small parking lot overflowed as people drove from neighboring towns to experience the bakery for themselves. "I read about you online," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "Your story about rising above cruelty, it gave me hope." Lucia squeezed her hand. "God's grace is bigger than our pain." The bell above the door chimed constantly. Lucia barely had time to restock her shelves before they emptied again. Her regulars, the loggers, widows, and young mothers who'd supported her from the start, smiled knowingly as newcomers discovered what they'd always known. Lucia's bread fed more than just physical hunger. By afternoon, news vans appeared. Reporters clutched microphones, eager to interview the viral baker angel, as social media had dubbed her. They wanted to know about the wedding disaster, about her time with billionaire Adam Holt, about how she'd transformed rejection into redemption. Lucia met them with gentle firmness. "I'm just a baker," she said, declining interviews. "The story isn't about me. It's about how God can use our broken pieces to feed others." In his office downtown, Adam watched the online frenzy grow. His assistant had shown him the viral post, not knowing his connection to the story. He scrolled through comments praising Lucia's kindness, her resilience, her faith. Pride swelled in his chest, not surprise, because he'd always seen these qualities in her, but joy that others finally recognized them too. Then he noticed some comments mentioning the bakery's size, wondering how she managed the crowds in such a small space. His protective instinct flared. Without hesitation, he called his lawyer and arranged an anonymous donation through a charitable foundation. The next morning, Lucia found an envelope containing a certified check and a typed note. "For expansion of Bread and Grace's ministry." No signature, just a Bible verse about bread broken and multiplied to feed multitudes. She prayed over that check for 3 days before cashing it. But instead of simply expanding her retail space, Lucia felt called to do more. She started Bread and Blessings, a weekly dinner where anyone in need could come for hot food and fellowship. Every Thursday evening, she transformed the bakery into a dining room. Mismatched chairs crowded around borrowed tables. The homeless sat beside business people, single mothers beside elderly widowers. Lucia served homemade soup and fresh bread, but more importantly, she served dignity. Everyone was welcomed by name, treated as honored, guests rather than charity cases. Word spread. More volunteers came to help. The weekly dinner became a community touchstone, breaking down barriers between social classes over breaking bread. One Thursday evening, as Lucia stirred a pot of potato soup, the bell chimed. She turned to greet the newcomer and froze. Adam Holt stood in her doorway, arms full of grocery bags. "I heard you might need supplies," he said softly. Lucia's heart thundered in her chest. He looked both familiar and changed, still impeccably dressed, but somehow softer around the edges. The months apart had left subtle marks on them both. "The vegetables are for soup," he continued, filling the silence. "And I remember how you like to make garlic bread on Thursdays." She found her voice. "You've been keeping track." "I never really stopped." He set the bags on a counter. "I've read every devotional you've posted, followed the bakery's success from afar. I'm proud of you, Lucia." Instead of the anger or hurt she might have expected, Lucia felt a deep peace settle over her. "Would you like to stay?" she asked. We could use another set of hands. They worked side by side, chopping vegetables and setting tables. As the evening crowd filtered in, Adam watched in awe as Lucia greeted each person by name, remembering their stories, their prayers, their struggles. She moved through the room like a beacon of light, leaving hope in her wake. Later, after the last guest had left and the final dish was dried, they sat at a corner table with mugs of tea. The bakery was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerators and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. "I never stopped thinking about you," Adam admitted, staring into his mug. "Every time I saw your words online, every time I sent my driver to buy bread, I wanted to come myself, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you'd hate me, that you'd think I abandoned you when the board threatened me, that you were better off without me complicating your life." Lucia reached across the table and touched his hand. "Then maybe God never wanted us apart," she said softly. "Maybe he just needed us to find our own paths first." Adam turned his hand over, entwining their fingers. "Tell me about these months," he said. "Tell me everything." So she did. She told him about the fear of starting over, about the first loaf she baked in her tiny rented kitchen, about the elderly woman who became her first regular customer and now felt like a second mother. She described the joy of seeing her devotionals touch hearts, the way God had transformed her pain into purpose. In turn, Adam shared his own journey, the emptiness of his mansion after she left, the way her simple prayer note had haunted him, how watching her success from afar had helped him rediscover his own faith. They talked until the moon rose high, casting silver light through the bakery windows. Their tea grew cold, forgotten as they bridged the months of silence with words, laughter, and shared understanding. Neither mentioned love or the future. For now, it was enough to sit in the peace of reunion, knowing that sometimes the longest roads lead exactly where they're meant to. The bakery became Adam's sanctuary. Each morning he arrived before dawn, rolling up the sleeves of his expensive shirts to help Lucia prepare for the day. The familiar rhythm of kneading dough and measuring ingredients brought a peace he hadn't known since his wife's passing. "You're getting flour on your tie again?" Lucia would tease, brushing white powder from his silk neckwear. "Worth every speck," he'd reply, his eyes crinkling with genuine joy. The locals who once whispered behind their hands now watched in wonder as the billionaire CEO mopped floors and hauled sacks of flour. He learned every regular customer's name, remembered their usual orders, and joined Lucia in praying for their needs. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who came every Tuesday for sourdough, patted his cheek one morning. "You've changed, Mr. Holt. There's light in your eyes now." He glanced at Lucia, who was teaching a young mother how to braid challah bread. "I found something worth more than money," he said softly. The bread and blessings dinners grew larger each week. Adam insisted on funding additional tables and chairs, but he served alongside everyone else, wearing the same simple apron as other volunteers. He and Lucia moved in perfect sync, anticipating each other's needs without words. One evening, while stirring soup, Lucia caught him watching her with such tenderness that her hands trembled. "What?" she asked. "You make everyone feel valued," he said. "It's not just the food. It's how you see people, how you love them." She blushed. "God loves them. I'm just the delivery service." "You're so much more than that," he whispered, but a timer dinged before he could continue. Their friendship deepened like bread rising, slowly, steadily, with warmth at its core. They shared quiet moments between customers, talking about everything and nothing. Adam opened up about his late wife's battle with cancer, how it had shaken his faith. Lucia spoke of her struggles with self-worth and how God had turned her pain into ministry. The town noticed. Old-timers at the diner discussed how natural they looked together, how the infamous scandal had transformed into something beautiful. Young couples asked Lucia to bake their wedding cakes, saying they wanted a love story like yours. But we're not. Lucia would start to protest, then fall silent, unsure how to define what was growing between them. December arrived, bringing swirling snow and twinkling lights to the shop windows. One Thursday night, after the last bread and blessings guest had gone, Adam helped Lucia close up. The bakery was warm and fragrant with cinnamon and vanilla, snow falling softly outside the frosted windows. Lucia was counting the day's receipts when she realized Adam had grown quiet. She turned to find him kneeling beside her chair, holding a small velvet box. "Adam?" Her voice caught. "The first time I saw you," he said. "You were running from a church in tears, and all I could think was how wrong they were, how blind they were not to see your beauty." His hands trembled slightly. "I acted on impulse that day, trying to protect you, but now—" He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring with a single pearl. "Now I'm asking with my whole heart, not out of pity, out of love." Tears spilled down Lucia's cheeks as he continued. "You've taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the way you give yourself to others. You've helped me find my faith again, showed me what grace looks like in action." He took her hand. "Lucia May Daniels, will you marry me?" She couldn't speak through her tears, but she nodded emphatically. Adam slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. They held each other, swaying slightly in the quiet bakery. "We should pray," Lucia whispered against his shoulder. Still holding hands, they bowed their heads together. "Thank you, Lord," Adam prayed, his voice rough with emotion, "for grace in unexpected places, for turning our broken pieces into something beautiful, and for giving us new hearts," Lucia added softly, "when we thought ours were too damaged to love again." They shared their news with the morning's first customers, and word spread through the town like wildfire. By noon, the bakery's door kept chiming as people streamed in with congratulations and hugs. Someone brought ribbons, another brought candles. The ladies' auxiliary arrived with flowers. Children made paper chains to hang in the windows. Mrs. Henderson organized an impromptu engagement celebration, turning the bakery into a wonderland of twinkling lights and winter blooms. The mayor's wife brought champagne, though Lucia insisted on serving sparkling cider instead. Everyone who had ever been touched by Lucia's kindness or Adam's generosity came to share their joy. That evening, after the celebration wound down, Lucia sat at her small desk in the back office. She opened her journal, the pages filled with prayers and reflections from the past months. With tears of gratitude in her eyes, she wrote, "The man who once saved me from shame now saves me from loneliness. But it wasn't really Adam who saved me. It was God's love working through him, just as I pray His love works through me to others. We are all broken bread, blessed and multiplied in His hands." The pearl on her ring caught the lamplight, simple and pure, like the love that had grown between them. Through the office door she could hear Adam chatting with the last few guests, his laugh warm and free. Love had indeed found its way, just as she had prayed it would, in God's perfect timing. The morning dew still sparkled on the bakery windows when Lucia heard her phone buzz. She'd been up since 4 o'clock, preparing wedding cake samples for their tasting later that day. Just 2 weeks until she and Adam would say their vows. Her heart felt light as she wiped flour from her hands to check the message. It was from her mother, and it made her blood run cold. "Turn on the news, sweetheart." With trembling fingers, Lucia grabbed the remote to the small TV she kept in the kitchen. The screen flickered to life, and her world crashed down around her. Breaking news! Billionaire CEO's bride to be exposed. The headline screamed across the bottom of the screen. There, splashed across national television, were private photos from her first wedding, the one that had ended in public humiliation. The images showed her in her mother's handmade dress, tears streaming down her face as she fled the church. The reporter's voice was cruel with fake sympathy. Sources say Lucia Daniels orchestrated an elaborate scheme to trap billionaire Adam Holt in a pity marriage. These exclusive photos reveal her first attempt at landing a wealthy husband. Lucia's legs gave out. She sank onto a flour-dusted stool, watching in horror as they twisted her story into something ugly and calculated. They painted her as a manipulative woman who had orchestrated her own public humiliation to gain Adam's sympathy. Her phone started ringing non-stop. First her mother, then her friends, then numbers she didn't recognize. Outside, she heard car doors slamming. Through the bakery's windows, she saw them. Reporters with cameras already gathering like vultures. The bell above the door chimed as her mother rushed in, face pale with worry. "Lucia, honey, there are reporters everywhere. They followed me from the house." Lucia hugged her mother tight, feeling her slight frame trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I never wanted you caught up in this." "Don't you dare apologize," her mother said fiercely. "We know the truth. Adam knows the truth." As if summoned by his name, Lucia's phone lit up with Adam's call. "Lucy," he said, using his private nickname for her, "don't watch the news. Don't read anything. I'm handling it." But she could hear the strain in his voice. "How bad is it?" A heavy pause. "The stock is dropping. But it's temporary. We'll weather this." "How much, Adam?" 20% since the market opened." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "My board is meeting in an hour. I'll call you after." The morning crawled by in a nightmare of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Lucia and her mother huddled in the back of the bakery, watching through the security cameras as reporters harassed customers trying to enter. By noon, the police had set up barriers to keep the media at bay. Lucia's phone buzzed with a text from Adam's assistant. "Turn on CNBC now." With shaking hands, she changed the channel. There was Adam, leaving his office building, surrounded by reporters. His face was carved from stone as cameras pressed close. "Mr. Holt, is it true your fiancée orchestrated this whole romance?" "Did you know about her first wedding? Will you be cancelling the engagement?" Adam stopped. The cameras went quiet, waiting. His voice, when it came, was ice cold. "My fiancée is the most genuine, compassionate person I know. Anyone suggesting otherwise will hear from my lawyers." Lucia's heart swelled with love and fear. She knew what it cost him to defend her so publicly. Hours passed. The storm of media attention grew. Online forums exploded with cruel memes and nasty speculation. Lucia's social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages. She turned off her phone, but couldn't escape the sound of reporters calling her name from outside. At 7 o'clock that evening, she heard Adam in heated conversation just outside the bakery's back door. She crept closer, not meaning to eavesdrop, but drawn by the intensity in his voice. "I don't care about the stock price," he was saying. "No, listen to me. She's not going anywhere. What do you mean, ultimatum?" Lucia pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stay quiet as she listened. "The board can't force me to—" Adam's voice cracked with disbelief. "You can't be serious. That's everything we've built for 15 years. Through the door's window, Lucia could see him pacing, phone pressed to his ear. His free hand was clenched in a fist. "If you do this," he said, "you'll destroy thousands of jobs, people who depend on us. No, please, just give me time to—" The pain in his voice broke something in Lucia's heart. She knew what she had to do. Quietly, she slipped into the office. Her hands shook as she wrote the note, tears splashing onto the paper. "My dearest Adam, I won't be the reason you lose what you've built. Your company supports so many families, does so much good. I can't let my presence destroy that. You saved me once from public shame. Now it's my turn to save you from losing everything. Please don't look for me. Please know that loving you has been the greatest gift of my life. All my love, Lucia." She left the note on his desk, next to the wedding cake samples she'd worked on that morning. The sight of those perfect little cakes, now growing stale, nearly broke her resolve. But she thought of all the people who would lose their jobs, all the good works Adam's company did, and forced herself to walk away. The storm had started by then, rain mixing with her tears as she slipped out the back door. Adam was still on his phone at the front of the building, unaware that his world was about to shatter again. Lucia got into a car, hands trembling so badly she could barely turn the key. As she drove away into the darkness, the rain grew heavier, matching the storm in her heart. In her rearview mirror, she could see the bakery growing smaller, its warm lights a beacon she was leaving behind. Somewhere in that light was Adam, who had taught her to trust in love again. Adam, who had defended her to the world. Adam, who she loved enough to leave. The storm swallowed her, car as she drove into the night, carrying nothing but broken dreams and the memory of what could have been. When dawn broke, cold and grey, Adam found her note. He stood in the empty bakery, surrounded by the lingering scent of vanilla and cinnamon, holding the paper in trembling hands. The wedding cake samples sat untouched, their perfect white frosting now dulled, silent witnesses to dreams that had crumbled in the night. On the desk, her engagement ring caught the first light of morning, the pearl gleaming like a tear. Adam sank into her chair. The note crumpled in his fist, and for the first time since his wife's death, he wept without restraint. He had lost more than his company's stability. He had lost the woman who had brought his faith back to life, who had shown him that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in acts of grace. He had lost Lucia, and with her, his chance at happiness. Outside, reporters still called questions into the dawn, their cameras flashing like lightning in the morning mist. But inside the empty bakery, there was only silence and the lingering scent of bread that would never be baked. The days after Lucia's departure dragged like years for Adam Holt. Each morning, he walked through his mansion's empty halls, footsteps echoing against marble floors that seemed colder than ever before. The space that had briefly been warmed by Lucia's presence now felt like a mausoleum of lost chances. In his study, resignation letters piled up on his desk. First came Johnson, his chief financial advisor of 12 years. "I can't watch you destroy everything we built." The letter read. Then Matthews, his marketing director. By week's end, 5 of his top executives had jumped ship, like rats fleeing what they believed to be a sinking vessel. The investors were worse. They didn't even bother with letters. Their lawyers did the talking. One by one, they pulled their backing, millions vanishing from the company's accounts with each passing day. The stock price plummeted like a stone dropped in deep water. On the 7th day, Adam sat in his home theater, watching financial news channels tear apart his reputation. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed his company's stock in free fall. The once mighty Holt Industries appears to be in terminal decline, a sharp-faced analyst declared. Sources say the CEO's involvement with a small-town baker has scared off major investors. The question isn't if the company will fail, but when. Adam switched off the television, but the silence that followed was worse. It pressed in on him from all sides, filled with the ghost of Lucia's laughter, the memory of her prayers at breakfast, the echo of her kindness to his staff. He walked to his window, looking out over the city he'd once thought he owned. Lights twinkled in the distance, thousands of homes filled with families who depended on his company for their livelihoods. The weight of responsibility had never felt heavier. But as he stood there, something shifted in his heart. He remembered Lucia's words from one of their last conversations. Sometimes God strips everything away so we can see what really matters. With sudden clarity, Adam knew what he had to do. He called his PR team, instructing them to arrange a press conference for the next morning. They protested, begging him to reconsider, but his mind was made up. The following day, camera lights blazed in the Holt Industries conference room. Reporters packed the space, their faces eager for blood. Adam stood at the podium, his tie straight, his spine steel. But his eyes held something new, a peace that transcended understanding. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "For 15 years, I've measured my worth by the numbers in my bank account. I've equated success with stock prices and market share. I believed that was what made a man valuable." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "I was wrong." The reporters leaned forward, pens poised. "A few weeks ago, I met a woman who taught me that true worth isn't found in portfolios or profit margins. It's found in acts of kindness, in unwavering faith, in the courage to love despite fear of rejection." Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Adam continued, his voice growing stronger. "Today, I stand before you to declare that I'd rather be a poor man loved by God than a rich man ashamed of my bride. Lucia May Daniels is not my shame, she is my salvation. And if choosing her means losing everything else, then I count it all joy." The room erupted in chaos as Adam stepped away from the podium. Questions flew like arrows. "Are you resigning? What about the shareholders? Have you lost your mind?" But Adam walked through the storm of voices with his head high, ignoring the flashing cameras and shouted questions. In that moment, he felt lighter than he had in years. Meanwhile, 2 towns away, Lucia worked in a church shelter's kitchen, her hands covered in flour as she kneaded dough for the morning's bread. She'd found refuge here among the homeless women who didn't care about tabloid headlines or stock prices. The shelter's small television played in the corner, but Lucia kept her back to it, focusing on the rhythm of her hands in the dough. She'd avoided all media since leaving Adam, convinced that distance was the only gift she could give him now. The women she served noticed her sadness but didn't pry. They just accepted the warm bread she offered, along with her quiet smile. Many of them had their own stories of love and loss. They recognized a wounded heart when they saw one. At night, in her tiny room above the shelter's kitchen, Lucia would lie awake, remembering Adam's words. "You are chosen." The memory of his voice haunted her dreams, mixing with the sound of rain against the window and the distant whistle of trains passing in the night. She wrote in her journal each evening, pouring out her heart in prayers for Adam's happiness, for his company's recovery, for all the employees whose lives were affected. She never prayed for herself. She didn't feel worthy of asking for more than she'd already been given. The shelter became her sanctuary. During the day, she lost herself in service, baking bread, teaching cooking classes to women trying to rebuild their lives, listening to stories of struggle and survival. The work kept her hands busy, and her mind focused on others instead of her own broken heart. But sometimes, when she was alone in the kitchen late at night, preparing dough for the next day's bread, she would catch herself humming the song that had played during her first dance with Adam at that charity dinner. The memory would hit her like a physical blow, his gentle hands, his kind eyes, the way he'd defended her against the whispers and stares. In those moments, she would have to stop working, press her flour-covered hands against the counter, and breathe deeply until the pain subsided. Then she would return to her kneading, pouring all her love and longing into the bread that would feed others, finding purpose in the simple act of service. The The women at the shelter began to notice something special about Lucia's bread. It wasn't just the perfect crust or the tender crumb. There was something more, something that made each bite taste like home and hope and healing all at once. "There's prayer in this bread," one elderly resident said, holding a warm slice close to her heart. "You can taste it." Lucia just smiled and kept working, finding solace in the ancient rhythm of mixing, kneading, and baking. Each loaf was an offering, each batch a prayer sent out into the world. She might have lost her chance at love, but she hadn't lost her faith or her ability to serve. The days continued to pass, marked by the rising of dough and the coming and going of shelter residents. Lucia avoided newspapers and turned off her phone, trying to keep her heart focused on the present moment rather than dwelling on what might have been. But at night, in her dreams, she still heard Adam's voice, still felt the warmth of his hand in hers, still saw the love in his eyes when he'd said those words that now echoed in her heart. "You are chosen." She would wake from these dreams with tears on her cheeks, wondering if she'd made the right choice in leaving. But then she would think of all those jobs, all those families depending on Holt Industries, and she would know that love sometimes meant walking away, no matter how much it hurt. In the pre-dawn hours, she would rise and begin again, mixing flour and water, adding salt and yeast, creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. It was her way of choosing hope over despair, of finding purpose in pain, of believing that even broken dreams could rise again, transformed into something new and unexpected. Adam Holt stood in his penthouse one last time, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold and purple. The space that had once felt like a symbol of his success now seemed hollow, echoing with emptiness and regret. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from business associates and former board members, all expressing their shock at his decision to step down. He ignored them all, focused instead on the task before him. "Sir." His longtime assistant Margaret appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. "The real estate agent has the final contracts for the penthouse sale. The yacht broker is also waiting for your signature, and the luxury car dealership has agreed to take the entire collection." Adam nodded, his expression serene despite the magnitude of what he was giving up. "And the foundation paperwork?" "All prepared, sir. The Chosen Grace Foundation will be officially registered once the assets are transferred." He signed document after document, watching 38 years of accumulated wealth transform into something new. The penthouse would fund community outreach programs, the yacht's sale would build homeless shelters, his car collection would become job training centers. But none of it mattered without her. For weeks, Adam followed every lead, every whisper of a kind baker who served the homeless. He visited shelters in 5 cities, mission houses in 3 states. Each time his heart would leap at the mention of fresh bread, only to sink when he found someone else at the ovens. "There's this wonderful lady," an elderly man at one shelter told him, "makes bread that tastes like heaven itself. But she's been here 20 years, not who you're looking for, son." Adam kept searching. He spoke to shelter directors, volunteers, and residents. Some recognized him from the news, but most just saw a tired man with hope in his eyes, asking about a baker named Lucia. Finally, in a small church shelter 2 towns over, he found a promising lead. "Oh, you mean Miss Lucia?" A young volunteer brightened. "She's been such a blessing. Teaches the girls to bake and read scripture with them. They adore her." Adam's heart thundered in his chest. "Is she here now?" The volunteer nodded toward a door down the hall. "In the kitchen with her afternoon class." Adam approached slowly, hearing young voices mixing with a familiar gentle laugh that made his soul ache. Through the kitchen window he saw her, Lucia, flour dusting her hair, surrounded by 6 young girls as she demonstrated how to knead dough. "Remember," she was saying, "bread is like faith. It needs time to rise, and sometimes the waiting is the hardest part. But God's timing is always perfect." She looked thinner, tired perhaps, but her eyes still held that same inner light that had first drawn him to her. She wore a simple apron over modest clothes, so different from the designer suits that had surrounded him in his corporate life. Yet she had never looked more beautiful to him. The girls were focused on their dough, faces scrunched in concentration as they tried to copy Lucia's movements. One small girl with braids looked up and noticed Adam in the doorway. She tugged on Lucia's apron, pointing. When Lucia raised her eyes and saw him, she froze. The bowl she was holding slipped from her fingers, sending a cloud of flour into the air. It settled like snow around her, making the moment seem somehow magical. The girls giggled, looking between them with the intuitive understanding children often have about matters of the heart. Adam stepped forward, his expensive shoes leaving prints in the dusted floor. Without hesitation, he knelt before her, not caring about his suit or the flour or anything else in the world except the woman who had taught him to believe in love again. "You left before I could tell you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I chose you long before the crowd did. I chose you when you prayed over our breakfast that first morning. I chose you when you showed kindness to every person who walked into your bakery. I chose you when you taught me that faith isn't about success, it's about service." Lucia trembled, tears making tracks through the flour on her cheeks. "But your company? Everything you built? None of it matters without you," Adam said firmly. "I've sold it all. The penthouse, the yacht, the cars. Every penny is going into a foundation to help people like these beautiful girls, to create more places like this where people can find hope and purpose and love." The girls were watching with wide eyes, hands still covered in dough, completely entranced by the scene unfolding before them. "But why?" Lucia whispered. "Because you taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the bread we share, the prayers we offer, the love we give away." He held out his hand to her, flour and all. "I'm not asking you to come back to my world of wealth and power. I'm asking to join your world of service and faith. Will you teach me how to bake bread and share scripture and love people the way you do?" The youngest girl couldn't contain herself any longer. "Say yes, Miss Lucia. Say yes." A tear rolled down Lucia's cheek as she stepped forward, taking his outstretched hand. The girls erupted in cheers and applause, jumping up and down and sending more flour into the air. "Yes," she said softly, helping him to his feet. "Yes to baking bread together. Yes to serving others. Yes to choosing love over fear." Adam pulled her close, not caring about the flour that covered them both. In that humble church kitchen, surrounded by the sweet smell of bread and the joyful laughter of children, they found themselves exactly where they were meant to be, chosen by God, chosen by each other, chosen for a purpose greater than themselves. The next few days at the shelter brought a rhythm Adam had never known in his corporate life. He woke before dawn with Lucia to prepare the day's bread, learning the meditative art of kneading dough while she taught him her mother's recipes. His expensive suits stayed in his car, replaced by flour-dusted aprons and rolled-up sleeves. "You're pressing too hard," Lucia said gently on their second morning, placing her hands over his as he worked the dough. "Bread needs a gentle touch, like faith. Too much force, and it becomes tough." Adam relaxed his grip, following her lead. "Like everything you teach me, patience and trust." They worked side by side in the shelter's humble kitchen, baking hundreds of loaves each day. The smell of fresh bread drew people from all corners of the community. Homeless mothers with children, elderly men with weathered faces, teenagers seeking refuge from broken homes. Each person received not just bread, but also a moment of dignity, a warm smile, a listening ear. Lucia showed Adam how to truly see people beyond their circumstances. When a young mother came in with 3 small children, looking exhausted and ashamed, Lucia didn't just hand her bread. She sat with her, learned her story, and by the end of the week had helped her find work at a local diner. "This is what you were doing at your bakery all along," Adam realized one afternoon as they served lunch to a crowd of 50 people. "Not just feeding bodies, but nurturing souls." Lucia smiled, passing out warm rolls. God doesn't waste our pain. Sometimes our deepest hurts become our greatest ministry. The shelter's small kitchen became their sanctuary. Between batches of bread, they shared stories of their time apart, how Adam had searched countless shelters, following whispers of her kindness, while Lucia had poured her heartache into serving others. Their love deepened not through grand gestures, but in simple moments, washing dishes together, praying over meals, teaching young girls to read scripture while cookies baked in the oven. On their 4th evening, after the last dish was dried and put away, Adam asked Lucia to wait in the kitchen while he stepped out. She heard him moving around in the dining area, but stayed put, trusting his request. When he finally called her name, she opened the door to find the dining room transformed. Candles flickered on every table, their warm light dancing off the well-worn walls. The scent of fresh bread still lingered in the air, mixing with the sweet perfume of wildflowers he'd gathered from the shelter's small garden. Adam stood in the center of the room, no longer the polished CEO she'd first met, but a man humbled and strengthened by love. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a smudge of flour still on his forearm, his eyes bright with purpose. "The first time I proposed," he said softly as she approached, "it was an impulse born of righteous anger. The second time, in your bakery, it was born of growing love. But this time—" He took her hands in his, and she felt them trembling slightly. "This time, it's born of complete certainty." He knelt before her on the linoleum floor, pulling out a simple silver ring, not the expensive diamond from before, but something more meaningful. "This was my grandmother's ring," he explained. "She was a woman of faith who taught me about grace long before I understood what it meant. Like you, she believed in serving others above herself." Lucia's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "If God's grace could find us once, it can bless us forever. You've taught me that love isn't about protection or provision, it's about partnership in purpose. Will you marry me, Lucia May Daniels? Not as a billionaire's wife, but as my partner in serving God's people?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, they heard soft clapping. Looking up, they saw the shelter's residents and volunteers gathered in the doorway, faces glowing in the candlelight. These people who had become their family over the past few days shared in their joy with genuine happiness. The next morning, as they drove back to their hometown, Lucia grew quiet. Adam reached over and squeezed her hand. "What's on your mind, love?" "I want to get married in the old church," she said suddenly. Where it all happened before." Adam studied her face carefully. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her voice growing stronger. "That place holds so much pain, but maybe that's exactly why we should transform it with joy. Show others that God can redeem any situation, any hurt." Word spread quickly through the small town. The same people who had once whispered and laughed now came forward with offerings of help. The local florist insisted on donating arrangements. The church women's group gathered to clean and polish every pew. Even the children who had witnessed her humiliation months ago now helped hang ribbons and streamers with solemn dedication. The transformation of the church became a symbol of transformation in hearts. Where gossip had once filled the air, now there were prayers and songs of joy. The pews that had once held judgment now held hope. People who had turned away in her moment of pain now worked together to create something beautiful. Mrs. Henderson, who had been one of the loudest gossipers at the first wedding, approached Lucia with tears in her eyes. "Can you ever forgive us?" she asked, clutching Lucia's hands. "We were so wrong, so cruel." Lucia embraced the older woman. "God's grace is big enough for all of us," she said softly. That's what this wedding is about. Not just love between two people, but love that heals an entire community. Adam watched these scenes unfold with awe, seeing how Lucia's forgiveness was changing not just individual hearts, but the entire fabric of the town. His own heart swelled with pride and love for this woman who had taught him that true strength lies not in wealth or power, but in the courage to love without condition. Each evening after working on wedding preparations, they would sit in the back pew of the church together, holding hands in the quiet sanctuary. Sometimes they prayed, sometimes they simply sat in peaceful silence, but always they felt the presence of something greater than themselves, a love that had found them in their brokenness and was making them whole again. The church, once a place of Lucia's deepest wound, was becoming a testament to God's redemptive power. Where tears of shame had once fallen, joy would now overflow. Where laughter had once mocked, love would now triumph. Every ribbon hung, every flower arranged, every pew polished spoke of transformation, not just of a space, but of hearts, of lives, of an entire community learning that love, when rooted in faith, could overcome any obstacle and heal any hurt. The church bells pealed across the quiet morning air, their joyful sound echoing through the town square. Inside the old sanctuary, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews where once there had been only shadows of judgment. Lucia stood at the back of the church, her hands steady as they cradled a fresh loaf of bread she'd baked at dawn. The warm, crusty bread represented everything she believed in: sustenance, sharing, and simple faith. Her dress, crafted with loving care over many evenings, was elegant in its simplicity, soft ivory cotton with delicate lace she'd sewn by hand. No designer label, no expensive silk, just honest work and heartfelt intention. "Are you ready, dear?" Pastor Reuben asked softly, his kind eyes twinkling. Lucia nodded, her heart full and peaceful. "More ready than I've ever been." The organ music swelled, and as the doors opened wide, Lucia saw what true redemption looked like. The same sanctuary that had once witnessed her deepest humiliation now glowed with hundreds of candles and genuine smiles. Where there had once been whispers, now there was reverent silence. Where there had once been mocking laughter, now there were tears of joy. Adam stood at the altar, and when his eyes met hers, everything else faded away. He wasn't wearing an expensive designer suit this time, just a simple dark blue suit that matched the honesty of their love. Tears glistened in his eyes, but his smile was radiant with certainty. Each step down the aisle felt like a victory. Lucia noticed familiar faces, the elderly women she baked for, the homeless men she'd fed, the children from the shelter who now scattered rose petals in her path. Even those who had once been cruel now stood with bowed heads and humble hearts. When she reached Adam, he gently touched the loaf of bread in her hands, understanding its significance. This wasn't just their wedding, it was a testimony to God's ability to turn pain into purpose. Pastor Reuben began the ceremony with words that touched every heart. "We gather today not just to witness a marriage, but to celebrate redemption, to see how love, when guided by faith, can transform not just two hearts, but an entire community. Adam's voice was strong and clear as he spoke his vows. "Lucia, I promise not just to love you, but to serve God's purpose alongside you. You've taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the bread we break together, in the lives we touch, in the grace we share. I vow to be your partner in faith, your companion in service, and your protector in love. Not because you need protection, but because standing with you makes me stronger." Tears flowed freely as Lucia responded, "Adam, you found me when I was broken, but you saw strength where others saw weakness. I promise to walk beside you in faith, to remind you of God's grace in our darkest moments, and to love you with the same unconditional acceptance you've shown me. Together, we'll serve God's purpose. One heart, one loaf, one act of kindness at a time." News cameras quietly recorded from the back of the church, but this time they captured something pure, a moment of genuine redemption that would touch millions. The ceremony wasn't about spectacle or scandal. It was about the transformative power of love rooted in faith. As Pastor Reuben pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in joyful celebration. The same space that had once echoed with cruel laughter now rang with genuine applause and blessing. By the next morning, the wedding had gone viral for all the right reasons. Headlines across the internet proclaimed, "The wedding that healed the internet." Social media overflowed with messages of apology and support. Former critics publicly recanted their cruel words, moved by the visible transformation they'd witnessed. Donations poured into Lucia's bakery from around the world, not out of pity, but inspired by her example of grace. People from every continent sent messages about how her story had touched their lives, healing their own wounds of rejection and teaching them about true forgiveness. The bread she'd carried down the aisle became a symbol of their ministry together, breaking bread with the broken, feeding bodies and souls, transforming pain into purpose. Each donation received would go toward expanding their outreach, creating more opportunities to serve those in need. As cameras flashed and reporters gathered outside, Adam and Lucia slipped out the back door of the church, hand in hand, ready to begin their life together. Not as a billionaire and his bride, but as two people committed to serving God's purpose, one act of kindness at a time. 6 months after their wedding, the grand opening of Chosen Bread drew crowds from across 3 states. The newly renovated building, once a forgotten warehouse, now sparkled with warmth and purpose. Golden light spilled from its windows onto the early morning snow, while the aroma of fresh-baked bread drew people in from the cold. Inside, Lucia moved with quiet confidence between industrial ovens and gleaming counters. Her staff, many of them women from local shelters, worked alongside her, learning not just baking skills, but rediscovering their own worth. The walls displayed framed copies of her devotionals, now published under her real name, Lucia May Holt, in a collection titled Bread and Grace, Daily Words for the Hungry Heart. Adam had transformed the upper floor into a community space where women could attend free classes on business skills, financial literacy, and spiritual growth. Every purchase from the bakery directly funded these programs and supported local women's shelters. The media called it conscious capitalism, but Adam and Lucia simply called it answering God's call. One particularly busy evening, after the last customer left clutching warm loaves wrapped in paper stamped with chosen bread, baked with purpose, Lucia wiped down counters while Adam balanced the day's books. The statistics moved him. They'd provided shelter for 15 women this month alone, and their second location was already under construction in the neighboring city. "Do you remember?" Lucia asked softly, placing fresh cinnamon rolls in the donation box for tomorrow morning's shelter delivery. "When you found me at that church shelter?" Adam looked up from his work, his eyes softening. I remember searching every shelter in 3 counties, praying I'd find you before my heart gave out. And now we're building shelters instead of searching them, she said, smiling as she untied her flour-dusted apron. Adam set down his pen and walked over to the light switch. The bakery gradually dimmed except for the soft glow of the display case lights. In the gentle illumination, he could still see traces of flour on Lucia's cheek. He reached out and pulled her close, his hands warm against her back. You know something? He murmured. You were never unwanted. Heaven just needed the right moment for us to find each other. Lucia smiled, resting her head against his chest. The familiar scent of warm bread surrounded them, mingling with the cold winter air seeping in under the door. Through the front windows, snow had begun to fall, adding to the peaceful silence of the evening. God's timing is perfect, she whispered, thinking of all the paths that had led them here. Paths of pain transformed into purpose, of humiliation turned to honor. They stood there for a moment longer, holding each other in the quiet bakery that had become more than just a business. It was their ministry, their testimony, their way of showing the world that love could heal and restore. Finally, Adam reached for their coats. As they prepared to leave, Lucia took one last look around the bakery, at the women's shelter flyers by the register, the prayer request box that was always full, the wall of thank you letters from lives touched by their work. They locked the door and stepped out into the gentle snowfall, their hands finding each other naturally. The soft flakes landed on Lucia's dark hair like a crown of stars, and Adam squeezed her hand tighter. Together they walked home through the quiet streets, living proof that sometimes redemption tastes like fresh bread and faith reborn. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.